for me, it helped tremendously after I did, and I was featured in a major article in New Scientist magazine. And that helped to legitimize everything that I was saying before that, which was ignored. So I was trying to tell people before that happened. I think this was 2016 when that came out. And there was a huge shift the in the audience of initially not accepting anything I was saying and actually being quite antagonistic to it, to suddenly
Mm.
accepting everything I was saying and actually allowing me to be heard. My name's Andrew Scarborough. I'm from the UK. I am known for being a long-term survivor of a malignant brain tumor. I'm also a writer and researcher, so I actually research cancer, which came about after my diagnosis.
With all the knowledge that you've come across now, your experiences, if you were to go back 15, 20 years ago, what would you do differently in terms of your lifestyle, in terms of the way you ate, in terms of the way you exercised?
Well, I would have been in my 20s then, mid 20s, is I'll be 40 this year, which sounds crazy because it feels like a lifetime ago, looking back. I assumed I was extremely healthy at the time. So now I know just about how that wasn't necessarily the case. I was on a pescatarian diet, which I thought was an amazing diet to be on. And for some people, it may have been better than
Mhm.
others. But for me, I had lots of issues, particularly with gut health and depressive episodes. And I had a background prior to that of quite serious disordered eating, um, from binge eating disorder to anorexia, and then back to binging and purging again. And that was from a very young age. So there was something there that was causing me to have these kind of behaviors, these compulsive behaviors with food and exercise. And I'd reached a point where on my pescatarian diet that I thought I'd solved the diet side of it, but I was still addicted to exercise, and I would binge on what I thought was healthy foods. So I just binge on salads and things like that. Um, but it was quite a relatively low fat diet, and I felt I didn't feel so good, but I actually looked really good. Like had a substantial amount of muscle mass before my diagnosis, and I was playing badminton at quite a high level. And I'd studied degree in sports sciences, which covered exercise, nutrition, and health. That was kind of the named field. Um, that was the name of the course: exercise, nutrition, and health sciences. And yeah, I thought it was super healthy. So the things I would have changed is I would have shook myself and said, "You need you need to have more fat in your diet." That would be the first thing, and
Mhm.
not fear animal fats and red meat. That would be a massive thing because I definitely had issues with not having red meat in my diet. Sometimes I would have little bits, but it was very lean meat, and I didn't.
Mm.
Yeah, I actively tried to avoid it, and yeah, just having seed oils and these kinds of things. But I'd say the major thing in my life was just the mental side as well, triggering those compulsions because I was obsessive about my diet and everything.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, if someone was to say, yeah, I'm sure you get this uh, comment or criticism quite a bit in terms of you being an anecdote, or it's an N of one experience, right? Do you, if people were to say that your dietary changes are specific to you, you're an outlier in that, one, the cancer that you got, and two, the way in which you have kind of recovered and managed from that cancer, what would be your argument for that, or what would be your stance there?
Well, I've actually always stated that it's only speculative. It's other people who've
Okay.
put something on that to be whatever they want it to be. So it's kind of funny. I haven't actually had much criticism, I think, because I do that, and also because I don't make money out of sharing my story, or I don't try
Hmm.
and capitalize it on any way that's just not research focused in my own work. So
Mm.
yeah, I haven't. I'm actually surprised that I haven't had much criticism because
All of
I've
that.
seen other people and the criticism that they get, and even when I started adopting this diet after my brain tumor diagnosis, it was always to manage the epilepsy that I'd suffered as a result. And
Mm.
I was highly skeptical of any of the anti-cancer claims of ketogenic diets. And then eventually it progressed into being an oligo-antigenic ketogenic diet, whereby it was a ketogenic diet where I'd excluded so many foods that it became this carnivorous form of the diet that I didn't think was a thing that people were doing at that time. And
Mm.
so it's always been this thing where I'm not it I don't define myself by a way of eating. It's just something that's
Mm.
been beneficial for me, and I'm not someone who is advocating that everyone needs to do this, but I have developed a kind of a bias in that for most people it probably is beneficial because we have essential amino acids and essential fatty acids. And if you're just eating meat and fat, then you're having highly bioavailable nutrition that's essential for optimal brain function and hormones and weight regulation and all of these things. And so, yeah, it just makes sense to me to go for that approach because it's a lot more efficient in terms of the nutrients you get. It's a highly nutrient dense way of eating, and it does have relevance with evolutionary biology. And so, yeah, it just made the most sense to me, even though it was difficult for me to. It was difficult for me to accept earlier on because I wanted to follow a diet that was higher in plants and yeah, very
Okay.
different, more variety. So yeah,
I guess you being kind of using the terminology speculative, and having like caveats, would mean it makes you is a good characteristic for a researcher, which is what you are, right, at heart. Um, for that reason, in your research, have you found anybody? Have you found cases of people that have improved their cancer prognosis with plant-based diets?
yeah, quite a few.
Okay.
Um, and I think there are various reasons for that.
Hmm.
For a start, nutrient deprivation has anti-cancer benefits in the in the shorter term and perhaps longer. But so yeah, that's one. Also, if you're focusing on eating real food rather than just junk, that's going to have a benefit. Calorie restriction, we know, has longevity benefits, and also you're having some benefits of it being having anti-cancer benefits. I wanted to try and put that in a better way, but I can't think. But yeah, just and also plants can be medicine, so there's that aspect of it as well. You probably don't want to be on medicine long term, but but it's yeah, I wouldn't say it's not the wrong approach for everyone, because I do think there is individual variation to some degree. And I do think that eating what your ancestors ate has some degree of relevance as well. I know someone who has a background whereby the ancestors would have eaten lots of fruits. So, because in that region of the world, it's not just in the summertime where you can get berries and things like this. So, I think eating seasonally is a natural thing that you can think about how we're supposed to be eating. And that varies depending on your genetic background. So that's always been an interesting thing for me to think about, because I have mixed background, and so it makes me think, well, what yeah, what are we looking at here? What has most relevance, or is it a mixture of two things? But
Do you think in that case that there's potentially almost like a baseline diet that is applicable to everybody, but it's kind of like the variability comes in, say, the quantity, or as you said, the seasonality, or um, the glucose tolerance, and that kind of thing?
yeah, I think eating seasonally and locally is a huge thing, because that's
Hmm.
food is kind of like a way of eating light, if that makes sense. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so if you're in the UK in the winter eating a banana, that's probably not going to be aligned with all these different factors, which are so complex that I can't even begin to define, but I can understand it just from even a common sense point of view.
So, I mean, the standard of care biases towards
Mhm.
plant-based, right? So, if you wanted to see some sort of change within the way people's kind of diseases were handled, it would be kind of the openness to kind of a meat-based way of eating. But how would you argue or advise that should be tested for? Which is the better option for one person over another?
Well, you can have these genetic tests which give you some insight. However, overall, I haven't found them particularly useful, because I've had them over
Mm.
the years. The easiest way, which doesn't sound very scientific, is just to have trial and error and see how you feel. There's a lot to be said for how you feel.
Hmm.
And I do have
Mm.
regular blood tests every few months, usually every 6 months, just to see how I'm doing. And I do know that varies on a more carnivorous diet and how you interpret that. But if you try and think about it in that context of what makes the most sense, then I think you can determine what's benefiting you most. And in the context of cancer, if you're following the glucose ketone index, which is something that I have since that model came about,
Mm.
then it's just about all this testing, frequent testing, which you don't have to do consistently for years. I used to do that a lot, but because I've been doing this for over 12 years now, it's kind of just become normal, and it's abnormal to think any differently. And so, yeah, just seeing how you feel and testing. And for me, it's been a blessing that I had horrible epilepsy, which sounds like a funny thing to say, but that's been my barometer of what's been most helpful for me, because my seizures are still very sensitive, in that if I were to change my diet, I would instantly have seizures. If I stay eating the way I am and living the way I am, I don't have any seizures.
So you've basically got like an alarm that a lot of people don't
Yeah.
have. Um,
And I've been able to increase my threshold for that over the years,
okay,
to the point where I'm now,
okay.
I have experimented with different foods to varying degrees of success. And I also do things like, which I wouldn't actually recommend. It's like a test that I'm doing. I do long distance running. And I'm
Hmm,
doing my
hmm.
first marathon next month, and then I'm stopping running completely because I don't think it's particularly healthy.
Okay, okay. Healthy in general or healthy for you?
Well, I'm not sure about healthy in general,
Mm,
because yeah, I've gone back and forth on that. It's difficult to say, but
mm,
for me, I don't think it would be healthy to continue doing that, even though my fitness is improving to the point where my times are pretty fast. Because I feel like if you can get it done as quickly as you can, then you're not
mm,
having hours of, you know, slugging on roads, and it's just not. It's a highly stressful event on the body, so that can't be
mm.
good. Having hours of
And in terms of like with marathon running, is it like is one of your concerns about your blood sugar response?
that used to be the concern. Interestingly, when I started running, it would I'd instantly have a seizure. But then
Oh.
as my VO2 max improved, I was able, and
Mm,
my neurofeedback, kind of the biofeedback I was using to control seizures with exercise in general, as that improved,
mm,
I was able to go further and further with the running and have a higher seizure threshold as my fitness improved. But to get your fitness to improve, you need to push the boundaries. So I'd pushed myself as much as I could, just to the point where I was about to have a seizure, and then I'd pull back. And then consistently doing that actually increased my seizure threshold. And so I think that's actually a good thing, that challenge and then that adaptation. But to get there is quite insane, actually. You have to be quite mad to push yourself to do that. I did a similar thing with speech therapy, because my tumor and the brain hemorrhage that I had, that caused well, allowed us to identify that there was a tumor there. It left me with speech deficits. And so, in part of my speech therapy, I added singing, and I'd sing to the point where I was about to have a seizure, and then I'd pull back from that, and then I kept training it until I'd reached this kind of resistance to that level. And I do the same thing with breathing exercises and with how I breathe when I run. So running actually can help me massively, and has done. But I just feel as though I can do it in with shorter distances. I don't have to do these mega distances with running. So I'll continue running, but not like that.
You're very you seem to have a very curious mind, and I'm sure you had that before your diagnosis. Um, what would you advise? So, from personal experience, you know, I've had some family and friends that have had cancer, um, and I've always been into fitness. So, my number one answer for everything is, you know, get fit, go to the gym, exercise, all of that stuff. And it's only in recently that I've got more into nutrition. It was my mum's health that kind of triggered me getting into the whole kind of meat based way of eating. Um, but yeah, there's often a fear that anything that somebody does that is counter to conventional advice is, you know, there's a big huge fear of it. There's sometimes there's like a massive intimidation from, you know, the medical institutions can sometimes be quite intimidating for, you know, ordinary people to navigate. And I understand that you have a background in patient advocacy. So, how do you go about making people feel a little bit more comfortable going against conventional advice?
Well, I feel as though, thankfully, these approaches that we're talking about here are becoming more widely accepted and recognized. So it's a lot easier than when I was diagnosed and when I first heard about ketogenic diets in 2012 when I was suffering the migraines that led to my brain tumor diagnosis. And so it's much easier now. You can point people to the information and the studies, which wasn't really about as much prior to that. So for me, it's just about information. If the information's there, then that, that's the best way of informing people or convincing people, because it's very hard to go against consensus. Consensus is still that plant-based diets are the way to go, and Mediterranean diets, which aren't really well defined, could mean so many different things. But yeah, it's just about having that evidence and having those examples. For me, it helped tremendously after I did. And I was featured in a major article in New Scientist magazine, and that helped to legitimize everything that I was saying before that, which was ignored. So I was trying to tell people before that happened. I think this was 2016 when that came out, and there was a huge shift the in the audience of initially not accepting anything I was saying and actually being quite antagonistic to it, to suddenly
Mm,
accepting everything I was saying, and actually allowing me to be heard, because prior to that
mhm,
it wasn't the case. And I was actually at university at that point because I'd gone back after my diagnosis to study cancer biology, to focus on cancer. And it was in my second year, I think, when that article came out. And even the lecturers treated me differently, because before that they didn't like how I would put my hand up and challenge what they were saying about cancer and about diet, and so many things changed from that point. And
mm,
I was studying alongside Isabella Cooper, who she's now a doctor, who
mhm.
yeah, just got caught wind of that story, and suddenly I had lots of attention, and we got together a group of like-minded people who were studying, like-minded students who were studying nutrition. And now she's done all of these amazing studies, and I'm part of that work. But she can take all the credit for how she's run with it and just gone so far. But we work well together and we bounce off each other. So I think that helps in that, because the aim of what I'm doing now is to produce these studies on metabolic health and brain cancer and cancer in general, and all these different non-communicable diseases, to then
Mm.
be able to share that with people, and then it helps to further give authority to my words rather than just being an
Mm.
anecdote.
Do you actually, a side note? So I said before that I was into fitness. One of the projects that I did, I worked with doctor that you may know, Dr. Bradley Elliott. Does that
Yeah,
ring a
yeah.
bell at all? Yeah, and
Okay.
he when I worked on this project, he actually mentioned, when I was talking about the whole kind of getting into low carb eating, he actually mentioned your name, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, there's this guy whose views were out there at one point, but now seem to be accepted," and that's, I guess, from stuff like The New Scientist, the publication of The New Scientist. But I mean, that was in 2016.
It's so
Um,
funny,
from
just to
my
kind of interject slightly. It's
Yeah,
so funny how there's this 6 degrees of separation type thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Brad Elliott work when he was in New Zealand worked under Professor Bart Kay, and Bart Kay
Oh,
is
for
in this
real?
space.
I didn't know that.
It's kind of funny how things
Yeah.
kind of fit like that.
Oh, next time I see him, I'll
I just
mention
thought,
that. Yeah, he never mentioned Bart K. He mentioned you, but yeah, because when I was talking about this whole kind of meat based thing, yeah, he mentioned you. But yeah, with the publications like New Scientist, like, from my vantage point, I'm not a researcher. I'm just somebody that's very, very curious about kind of health and longevity and all of that, and also have had personal experiences with people being very ill and wondering why, when those people seemingly were people that like you, were healthy or followed a healthy lifestyle, in inverted commas. Um, why, in your view, is there not more kind of media coverage of people like you? Um, like, when I've done the research on it, I found you, I found Pablo Kelly as well, who unfortunately I know passed away, but had
yeah, I told
absolutely,
him about the diet when he after he was diagnosed, because he was diagnosed a few years after me, and so I was helping him to understand it. But yeah, it was very sad because there are certain aspects of his story that, if he'd had better if he'd had better treatment, then he might still be alive now.
yeah, I understand it was the treatment, not the cancer, that was the cause
Well,
of his passing.
in his case, initially they said that his tumor was inoperable,
Okay.
which wasn't the case. And so he was essentially on what's termed a watch and wait approach, but for a high grade glioma,
Mm,
which
mhm,
is, yeah, highly questionable. I don't know how that happened, but and then
mm.
the, I'm kind of speaking about someone else's case, which yeah, I don't know if I should do, but um, I just know that there was this idea that his tumor became operable through
Mm,
the interventions that he was
mm.
putting in place, but actually that's not quite accurate. And so
Okay.
he could have had an operation much earlier on that would have changed his course. But
Mm.
it's actually more remarkable in some instances that despite that, he managed to live so long. But it
100%.
could have
Yeah. And
been a better outcome if he'd had the operation earlier.
it's cases like his and cases like yours. I'm like, why is this not more mainstream? Why is this knowledge? Why are you, you seem like a very kind of gentle and quiet and introverted person, like myself, I guess. So maybe you don't invite that, but how? I mean, is that how you'd explain, you not being a, I don't know, the health influencer, basically,
Yeah, I'm extremely introverted. It used to be a lot worse. I couldn't even do this
Okay,
before. And my diet's actually
okay,
helped me a lot with that. I, from a very young age, I was a bit of a loner and I didn't like, well, I had a lot of trauma from a very young age for as long as I can remember. And then that influenced how I interacted with other people at school, and so I didn't have any friends. And whenever groups would try to pressurize me into doing things, I'd always just walked away from it and spent time on my own. And my escape was food and sci-fi and gaming. um, and my brothers were quite similar. So I have a brother who's 2 years older than me, who now works in gaming, and he's a Japanese to English translator. He's very introverted, and he's extremely successful in that he's one of the best in the world. So yeah, it's kind of funny, but I kind of went off on a tangent. But yeah, it's just
no, it's related. I mean, yeah, my kind of question was just about, why, your stories are not more mainstream,
yeah, I don't broadcast
in your opinion.
it, but I'm more
Yeah. But
comfortable.
people should be hunting you down. People, like, journalists should be on your doorstep, and
Well,
scientists should be kind of knocking your
I
door
did see,
down,
I
in
was
my opinion
part of
anyway.
a documentary with Isabella. We spent a few hours with the BBC, and they
Mm,
decided not to broadcast it in the end, because I think they
wow.
were the well, it seemed the way they were weaving their narrative was completely different to how we were presenting, and they seemed to find it difficult to work with because we were very reasoned and very scientific, and they wanted these
Mm,
kind
mm,
of
mm,
gotcha moments, to present it
mm,
as this wacky kind of thing. But we were very just methodical and very evidence based, and we were happy to get them into the lab to do filming. And I think they either found it too kind of uh, intense or too overwhelming, or it was what I am presuming just through my own feeling about it, my gut feeling about how they were speaking and how they were framing things, is that they wanted to have more of a negative kind of approach to it in terms of how they were, yeah, how they were framing it in their narrative. So yeah, I'm kind of glad it wasn't broadcast because I know how they would have tried to present it, but I think we
mm.
spoke to them in a way that it would have been very difficult for them to see any other way. So it didn't happen. But yeah, I think that's part of it. And yeah, the other part of it's just that I'm quite a shy person and I don't like getting the attention myself. I want the research to get the attention and my idea is to get the
Mm,
attention.
mm,
Even if someone else does
mhm.
it, and I've had some input. I don't really care about taking any claim. I'm just happy that it gets out there because people are dying, and brain cancer in particular is pretty horrific. And I've had friends die from it, and yeah, it's just horrible.
Yeah, I've so my mother-in-law had pancreatic cancer, and she passed away not too long ago. My mum had Alzheimer's, and she passed away from a stroke last year. And I'm constantly thinking of those two because they are not people that, on the face of it, they're not people that you consider unhealthy. They're not people that led, kind of unhealthy lifestyles. And then, they succumb to these. And then the other thing kind of linked to all of that is both their characters are they're quite introverted, chilled, gentle people. And I know
Empaths probably as well.
empaths, yeah, but yeah, and also interestingly for me, who I think I share that characteristic, is in the meat-based community, the low carb community, the carnivore community. The people that you tend to see are the quite loud, brash, out there individuals. I guess in any walks, any walk of life, it's like that. So for me, one of the things that is that I appreciate about you is your reasonableness, the way you come across. You come across very reasonable, very gentle, and yeah, you kind of put things together in a very kind of straightforward way. Um, and the whole of the kind of media landscape is based on kind of antagonistic content. So it's good to it's
Clickbaity
good
kind
that
of, yeah.
it's good that people like you are out there, and I know that it's very difficult to kind of um, be the face of the face of things. What are you working on at the moment? What is the research that you're doing?
I'm working on a number of different studies at the moment. One is related to exogenous ketones, in particular, a bioidentical ketone acid. So it's quite hard to describe the differences between the different forms of exogenous ketones because you've got the salts, the esters, and then you've got these bioidentical forms. Um, so yeah, I could think about how I'd describe them, but a salt is usually a form that's bound to magnesium or calcium or potassium, just so that you can ingest it, and then it doesn't need to be converted in the liver into ketones because it's already an exogenous form outside the body. An ester is much more potent and will be, yeah, it's much more potent and can elevate your blood ketones rapidly within just usually 15 minutes to half an hour. And
Mm,
those are often used in performance in athletics, and there's been clinical research in different neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's and
mm,
Parkinson's,
mm,
and in epilepsy as well. A lot of the research that we have, even from cancer, comes from the epilepsy side. So that's been a useful
mhm,
bridge for the brain cancer research. It's kind of how it got started, the ketogenic diet research in brain cancer, in that,
mm,
well, initially it was difficult to study, so they could say, well, we're just looking at treating the symptoms, which for many brain cancer patients, they will have epilepsy. And so you just say you're treating the symptoms, and then incidentally you can say, oh, and it's had this effect on the cancer, which is an interesting
mm,
observation. And then it became more accepted as, okay, we're using this to see, well, it's still kind of termed to be we're looking at it from a safety aspect. There's so many, there's safety and efficacy. Oh, yeah, just safety. And that's how they get around it, because they can't ever say we're seeing how it affects survival. So
Mm.
even now, after all these studies and all these years, it still says we're establishing the safety. It's kind of nuts, but it's how you have to do it.
With those caveats, yeah.
Yeah.
um, where do you stand with your experience? Where do you stand with medication and supplementation now? Um, are you somebody that would kind of want to focus or push people more to kind of like a whole food intervention, or do you think medication and whole food should be used together in situations like yours?
Well, there's some, I guess you could call them medications that I still take, but they're more supplements. I take
Hmm.
melatonin, but I cycle it, and I tend to
Okay.
take it more if I've had a lot of stress, or maybe my sleep hasn't been optimal, or I just feel a kind of feel like I've had days where I just feel overwhelmed. I take it because it's the most potent antioxidant that we have to hand, and it's an endogenous antioxidant, which is what we should be
Mm.
focusing on more than any kind of exogenous antioxidants, because that's
Mm.
kind of where we have a misrepresentation of what that actually does or doesn't do. And so
Mm.
we need to encourage the production of our endogenous antioxidants. And one of the best ways of doing that is being in therapeutic ketosis if you've got any kind of condition. And for healthy people, at least being in sometimes when you are in ketosis, and also optimizing sleep. So when you're optimizing sleep and that natural melatonin production, it's like an amazing medication that we have naturally, that we have access to, then it has very potent effects. So if you're taking that exogenously, you're further enhancing that production, and it's a very potent anti-cancer agent that we have naturally available to us. So optimizing sleep, and when necessary, having exogenous melatonin, that can be useful, and that's something that I supplement with. I also take astaxanthin, um, magnesium. I take different forms. I find that's crucial. Initially, I had it to help me to get off all of my anti-seizure medication, because I was on a massive dose, and magnesium effectively calms down that hyperexcitability in the neurons that you get with epilepsy. And so I was taking quite high dose magnesium when I was weaning off the medication, because I knew I would suffer from withdrawal seizures being on such a high dose for so long. And it was still pretty horrible to do, but I managed to get off all of those medications within 2 years. And yeah, it was life changing. And combining that with tweaks to my diet, that just I worked out the therapeutic ratios of the fats and proteins that I needed to have to effectively control my seizures, and I saw benefits on my MRI scans over that point in time as well,
Mhm.
where I achieved no evidence of disease on scans. Uh, I still think I still go by the idea that I still have cancer, so I'd never say cure. I don't like that
Mm.
word because it's still detectable in my blood with these advanced tests that few people even have access to. But yeah, so I don't take any medication, but I wouldn't say that it's been detrimental to me ever having had medication because early on I purposely put myself on an anti-seizure drug called sodium valproate, which has a huge amount of evidence in support of, and it also complements a ketogenic approach quite nicely. It has a synergistic effect. It's I believe it's a short chain fatty acid that has some activity. Um, and so it's not just one of these, and yeah, it's quite a broad. It has a broad mechanisms of action
Mm.
against cancer. So it's predominantly an HDAC inhibitor, but it has all these other benefits, and so it complements a ketogenic diet in that way as well.
Mm. So you've married the two approaches, supplementation as well as kind of changing the way you've eaten. Um,
The other thing I would add to that is that sodium valproate is also used in bipolar disorder and different mood disorders. And in a lot of different kinds of brain cancers, there is this kind of biochemical, there are these chemical changes in the brain.
mhm,
And with those class of drugs, some of them have anti-cancer benefits in those kinds of brain tumors.
mm,
And so one of the theories behind, or at least a contributory factor of how my brain tumor could have formed is a chemical imbalance. And so theoretically, if those drugs are helping to readdress that balance, my belief is that if you have cancer, it's because there are these imbalances that need to be addressed. And so if I'm having this shift to like a normal healthy brain, then it's perhaps impacting on the cancer in that way that it's reverting more to being like a healthy cell, or it's just killing off the cells in other ways with different mechanisms. But
yeah, I know you don't know for sure why that imbalance kind of happened, whether it's a genetic thing or an environmental thing. Do you have like I don't know, an instinct or a thought, or is it a mixture of the both?
yeah, I think it's a mixture of both. Um, the ketogenic diet also has this effect where it's changing brain chemistry favorably. You're having an increase in
Hmm.
GABA, and everything's just becoming normalized. So I noticed that
Hmm.
in that before I was on the diet, I was quite. I had clinical depression, and I would have these wild depressive episodes where it was a struggle just to even leave the house.
Mm.
And I had this deep self-loathing, and I used exercise in a bad way to kind of ameliorate those symptoms, let's say. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, when I'd managed to stay in at first nutritional, and then what I'd found would be for me therapeutic ketosis, which is where my ketones were in the region of 3 to 5 millimolars consistently. Then I found
Mm.
I didn't have any of those thoughts and feelings, and my brain just felt normal.
Mm,
And also, I didn't have those compulsions for exercise to that degree. It's more of a healthy thing.
mhm,
And I didn't have those cravings for sugar, which I had.
mm,
So,
mm.
yeah.
I was going to say that, along with those benefits, the fact that you're nearly 40 years old, but you look like a man that's in his 20s is potentially I don't know, a benefit of the diet, or is that just genetics, do you think?
I think it's the diet and lifestyle because I noticed a difference with my brothers as well. Uh, in that my eldest brother moved to Australia about 8 years ago, and he looks younger now than before he moved. And his diet and lifestyle is much better now than it was before. And so, yeah, looking younger than he did 8 years ago is kind of a signifier of something more. And with him being my brother, it's you can see it.
Unfortunately, you can't bottle lifestyle and sell it, so then there, yeah, it can be an uphill to try and convince people of the lifestyle changes.
I do have these bags at the moment though, because I been spending too much time in front of the computer last few days, but I don't normally have
Ah,
that.
okay. Well, I appreciate you spending the time, the last almost hour with me. Before we go, I just wanted to say, because we've just spoken about diet, but we haven't spoken about kind of specific foods
Mm.
that you eat, or the typical day of eating that you have. Like, how is what have you had today, for example?
Well, I've only had one meal today because usually I have
Okay.
a meal at 10 a.m. and then another at 4 p.m. So I'll probably eat
Hmm.
probably at 4 again. Sometimes I leave it to
Hmm.
5 because I'm actually not that hungry. But um, I have oily fish every day. So the first meal is usually mackerel or sardines or salmon. And then the second, because it's usually quite a light meal, actually, the first meal. I'll either have that or I'll have an omelette with lots of egg yolks.
Hmm.
But
Mm,
some
mm,
days I'll want to have lower fat. So I don't, yeah, it's odd. Sometimes my body doesn't want high fat, other days it wants super high fat. And so
mhm,
usually it's the same volume of food, but different cuts. So every day I have some type of fish, some type of meat, usually lamb, because I do best with lamb, and eggs. So every day is fish, meat, eggs, fish, meat, eggs. And so my second meal today will be just lamb and eggs. And if I feel like it, and the if the cut's not fatty enough, then I'll add extra fat. And sometimes I have yogurts which I make myself. It's either goat or sheep, and I use specific cultures that have anti-cancer benefits and that are good for the brain. And they're very fatty yogurts. They're not like, yeah, carby. I used to actually buy them before I started making them, and I could only find them in this specific Turkish supermarket. It's just this really fatty sheep yogurts, and I test my ketones after, and it just shot up. They're super high. And another thing I have is I have sauerkraut, which I make myself. So yeah, and I have olives and I have avocado, which interestingly I couldn't tolerate avocado for years before, but now I can. And I have macadamia nuts as well. So
So you're not worried about the evil polyphenols in the macadamia nuts and
You mean like oxalates and things?
the sorry, the
Because
oxalates, yeah.
macadamia nuts are very low oxalate.
It's low
Yeah,
in oxalates,
which
aren't
is why I
they? Yeah.
focused on.
Whereas
I don't have.
things like almonds are the highest, right?
Uh,
So almonds.
they're pretty high. I think they also have cyanide as well if they're not washed.
Yeah. There we go.
But
There
yeah,
we
I
go.
think walnuts and pecans are quite high in oxalates.
And oxalates. What's your sorry, another question that's you just reminded me of. What is your with all your experience now and what you've gone through, like how do you feel about the food industry? As in the ultra processed food industry, like does it, like when you're walking around potentially, like walking past the supermarket and seeing people kind of chowing on their, something from some ultra processed snack, does it does it make you angry? Does it get to you in any way? Or
Well, it's a product, isn't it? It's not really, shouldn't really be food. It's it's something that big organizations want you to be addicted to. I don't eat anything that's
Mm,
got a label on, and I have glass bottles, so I don't have the
mhm,
microplastics that you'd get even if you're buying meat from a supermarket. And so I think it's becoming more, people are becoming more aware of these things,
mm,
but we still have a long way to go. It doesn't make me angry. It just makes me more angry about, it does make me somewhat angry, but not about those companies or their products. It's more about that we have such a poor education. I was raised in a way that all my food was home cooked, and my mother taught me how to cook from a very young age as a single mother. And nowadays, single mothers use that as an excuse for not being able to cook, and it's not an excuse. So, yeah, that's how I feel about it. But I am quite passionate about at least eating real food, and secondary to that, eating locally and seasonally, at least if you're going to eat plants.
what is your overwhelming feeling about the position you're in? Do you feel lucky? Do you feel motivated? Do you feel that you've got to pay all of the kind of knowledge and experience that you've learnt forward? Like, what is your kind of overwhelming drive or feeling?
It's a mixture of feelings because I feel a huge responsibility to all these people who are diagnosed with brain tumors and they're getting younger. And
Mm,
it's quite, I think the reasons that the that people are getting younger when they're diagnosed is quite controversial. And so it's quite hard to. So, for example, my mother was diagnosed with esophageal cancer years ago now, a few years ago now. And that was caused by a medication she was taking. And if you even try and approach that subject of a medication causing a disease or any kind of thing like this, the instant reaction is no, that can't be the case, and you're just scaremongering or it's some conspiracy theory. And in her case, we were able to prove it, but we had to go through all these hoops and people saying that that couldn't be the case. And I see that on a larger scale with other things, other medications, and how we how our food is contaminated, how our air is contaminated, and the water
mhm.
that we drink. And yeah, there needs to be more of an awareness of that. I've done a lot of research into cancer clusters, and I've identified certain chemicals that can cause brain tumors. And the US keeps a lot better data on that, largely because they're more vocal when these things happen, and so the
Hmm.
government and these larger organizations are forced to accept it and to look into
Mm.
it. But we don't have that here. I feel like there's a real apathy in this country, um, and we kind of roll over and accept things, or we might grumble quietly to ourselves, or
Mm.
we don't have that kind of advocacy where we get together and we're not as vocal about these things. We might be internally, but not, or to family and friends, but we're not as I think we have a resignation sometimes
Mm.
to these kinds of things. We feel like we can't make change happen. Whereas, in the US
Mm.
they're more about change, and we can do things, and
Mm.
it's more of a can do attitude.
And questioning, they're comfortable questioning authority, I guess, more so than
Yeah,
we are, right?
absolutely. And to think differently. And I think that, yeah, we can get stuck in our ways here. So I try to surround myself with people who are similar minded to myself. Otherwise,
Hmm.
that can drag you
Hmm.
down. I think
Yeah.
that's been a major aspect of how well I've done. Just
Mm.
I surround myself with
Mm.
positive people and people that lift me rather than drag me down.
Yeah, that's yeah. And I guess in terms of trying to overcome, illnesses as well, that would help to have people that are like-minded and, kind of pushing you in the direction of an alternative intervention if that's the way that you decide to go.
Not
Yeah.
being so hard on yourself, and not also being a bit selfish and allowing yourself to look after yourself. Because people who, I think we touched on it earlier, people who have that empath personality are often the people who get things like brain cancer. And there's science behind that to show that it's a thing. I think Gabor Mate has done a lot on that. And there's also a book, The Body's is it The Body Keeps the Score? Yeah, touches on that too. And I think it's very important to think about that. That's been a huge thing that I try to implement, just to not be so hard on myself, and you know, to embrace challenge and to see it as what it is. You can overcome it.
Andrew, thank you for this, man. This has been awesome. It's been great to chat to you. I want to thank you also for the work that you're doing. And as I said before, like I think there is, even though we spoke about um the kind of the gentle nature of the British, I think there is something positive in you being a part of this space and also being kind of gentle in your approach and your presentation, because who are not some people who are not kind of attracted to the loud and brash need to hear it from someone else. So I appreciate you for that,
I
man.
appreciate you too. It's
Um,
great that we're having these conversations, and I hope to meet up with you in person sometime, because I think we could have
that'd be
some more
great. That'd be great.
interesting discussions.
100%, 100%. I noticed your glass bottled water. I'm a bit of a glass bottled water snob myself, and I'm gonna send you a link to a place where you can get it in the UK. You can get them quite
Mm.
cheap, and obviously bottled at source and all of
Yeah,
that jazz.
that's great.
So I'll send you that link as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, nice one, mate. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and yeah, thank you again for this. And I'll give you the heads up when this all goes live.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thanks.